Are one step closer to taking back the majority in November. And I can tell you, when we finally have the gavels in our hands, we won't be focused on ballrooms, algae-filled reflecting pools, golden arches, or UFC fights. Instead, unlike Republicans, Democrats will be laser focused on making America more affordable. Let's take a moment to reflect. Republicans have been in charge for 18 months, and what do they have to show for it? A big ugly bill that ripped healthcare and food assistance away from families just to pay for tax cuts for billionaires and corporations, tariffs that have driven up costs for consumers and small businesses, violent mass deportations that have upended American communities, and a failed war in Iran that has driven up the price of gas and groceries. This isn't a successful governing record, it's a record of broken promises. This is a House Republican majority that will be remembered for the incredible damage that they have done to our economy, driven by misplaced priorities and blind loyalty to Donald Trump. The American people sent Republicans to Washington for one clear reason: to lower the high cost of living. But in return, what did they get? They get a president who says he doesn't think about Americans' financial situation and that he loves inflation, and a corrupt administration that is profiting off the presidency while working people struggle to make ends meet. These aren't just bad policies. This is a refusal to put American workers first. And while House Republicans ignore Americans' kitchen table concerns, Democrats are facing them head on and will do everything we can in our power to tackle the cost of living crisis that Republicans have created. It's now my honor to introduce the Vice Chair of the Democratic Caucus, Ted Lieu.
Thank you, Chairman Aguilar. Inflation is up, grocery prices are up, utility costs are up, housing prices are up. We have a bipartisan housing bill that both the Congress and Senate passed. There was supposed to be a big signing ceremony today in the Capitol, and then all of a sudden, Donald Trump decides he's not coming to sign the bill. Well, why is that? Did he wake up on the wrong side of the bed? Is he unable to stay awake today? What's causing him to chicken out again? Is it Taco Wednesday? Or is it side effects from a drug? We don't know. This erratic behavior of the president is very concerning. He has trouble staying awake at multiple White House events and cabinet meetings. He has clearly some weakness in one of his arms. He's got swelling in his hands. And the White House needs to come clean. What we know is there's a report saying that one person in America got this special new drug. It was a 79-year-old person who's very high profile. And this drug can only be given to someone under the compassionate use provision, meaning you do that if someone basically has a terminal illness. So we need to know, did Donald Trump get this special drug from Eli Lilly? And did he get it under that provision? And if he did, why is that the case? The White House needs to come clean and tell the American people about Donald Trump's health. Now it is my great honor to introduce our Field General, the great Susan DelBene from the state of Washington, the chair of the DCCC.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And many thanks to Chair Aguilar and Vice Chair Lieu. Today in caucus, we gave an update on the work being done to take back the majority in November. We started with a conversation about how the data reveals an emerging consensus from the public. The American people are souring on Republicans' broken promises, and they are ready, eager, in fact, to reject them in November. Democrats are consistently ahead on the top priorities: inflation, cost of living, healthcare. Donald Trump and House Republicans are underwater, and our voters are motivated. In a recent analysis by 2026 House primary elections done by the Washington Post, they found that Democratic turnout has dwarfed Republican primary turnout by more than 4 million votes. This was true whether the primaries were competitive or not, in toss-ups or deep red seats. And the higher turnout numbers are pacing well ahead of 2018. It's clear that we're on track to win in November, and Republicans know it. It's why, and really the only reason why, they're going to such desperate, awful lengths to rig the midterms in their favor. Their push for new gerrymandered maps, despite the fact that the American people across the country hate it. Their attempts to block legal, proven, and secure forms of voting, like vote by mail. Their incredibly cynical attempts to meddle in Democratic primaries, spending at least $4.5 million so far. They're doing all of this because of one simple fact. Republicans know they can't win a free and fair election. Despite all the shenanigans and Republican dirty tricks, the American people are seeing through it, and they are rejecting it. They aren't just rejecting Republicans, they are choosing Democrats, as the Washington Post analysis shows. Part of how we're going to win in November is the contrast our candidates are creating on the campaign trail every day. And that starts with holding Republicans accountable for the big ugly bill. Next week will be 1 year since that awful bill was signed into law. And in that time, Americans have begun to feel the pain from it. 5 million people have lost their health care already. More than 770,000 children have had food assistance ripped away from them. Rural hospitals have closed or cut critical services. While the wealthiest few saw massive tax breaks on April 15th, hard-working families did not. It's no wonder that the big ugly bill has become one of the least popular pieces of legislation in recent history. Every vulnerable House Republican voted for this monstrosity, and we're going to make sure that every voter knows it when they cast their ballot. From roundtables, rallies, visits to food pantries, and ads, Democrats are taking the message to the people throughout this summer. And unlike House Republicans who have been hiding from their communities all cycle, House Democrats are talking directly to the American people. Democrats are in the strongest position yet to retake the majority this fall, and come next year, we will have the gavels and be in control of the House. Thank you all for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it back to Chairman Aguilar.
Questions? Max and Andrew?
Thanks. Obviously, we saw John SB out the election last night. Dan Goldman, the two incumbents, members of the Democratic Caucus, Mayor Mamdani, and DSA groups have backed the challengers from the Congress. Can you talk about the dynamic here? What New York City Mayor is doing, attacking members of your own caucus, and what is your message to Mayor Mamdani after the election results last night?
Look, the mayor in New York doesn't get a vote in the Democratic caucus. The members who are elected get those votes, and we look forward to working with the members that New York elects to serve in the Democratic caucus. But the path to 218 isn't through those districts that the mayor endorsed in. The path to 218 and to Democrats getting rid of the chaos and the insanity that we see is through districts like New York 17, where Kate Conley got through her primary and is going to beat Lawler. I mean, that's what this is about. I understand the interest, believe us, we understand the interest about these races, but our focus, our agenda is 218, and nothing that the mayor did helps or hurts us getting to that number. These are members who are going to be in the Democratic caucus. These are members who are going to help us turn back these terrible policies, and that's what we look forward to. But I'll just take a quick minute, Dan Goldman and Adriana Espaillat are just two incredibly great colleagues and class acts. I've had the pleasure to serve with both of them. Adriano, the first formerly undocumented individual to serve in Congress, the only Dominican American in Congress right now. Dan Goldman led the Trump impeachment in his prior life, a proven fighter. I've campaigned with both of them. Great individuals, and this Congress and this caucus will miss them. And we look forward to welcoming the members of the New York caucus and delegation who will serve with us in the next Congress. Anything else?
No, Kate Conley, you.
Kate Conley. Andrew?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, he's met like Daria Lisa Villa Chevalier, who beat Adriana Espat. She attended an anti-Israel rally on October 8th, 2023. A lot of other people, Claire Valdez, Chris Robb, Adam Homaway, a lot of candidates in that mold winning primaries, probably going to be here next year. Are you going to have a conversation with those members about what it's like to work in the Democratic caucus? Do you anticipate any having to work with that, especially in that where other members are on the ideological spectrum?
No, we'll have conversations with every member as members of the Democratic leadership, the three of us up here, as well as every member of the Democratic leadership team. We'll have conversations with our new members. They'll go through new member orientation. We'll talk with them about how to build their offices. We'll talk with them about the work-life balance of doing these jobs. We'll have all of those conversations with these new members. It will be nothing special. We'll talk with them about their hopes and their aspirations to represent their districts and what committees they want to serve on. All of those conversations are what we do for new members. And this group, this class of new members will be no different in that respect. We'll continue to have conversations and build relationships, with them. I want them to be successful for their constituents. And so I want to know what they need in order to make that happen. Some of them have said things that I disagree with in the past. And the mayor himself has said that some of these candidates have evolved in their views. We take them at face value, and we look forward to building a relationship. This being day zero, day one, and having a positive relationship and working to help them help the state and the city of New York moving forward. Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to go back to the housing bill. The press secretary, Caroline Levitt, said last night about the bill that it's one of the most significant pieces of housing affordability legislation in American history, unquote. The president said on Truth Social when he canceled the signing ceremony that it is
little consequence?
Minor importance.
Minor importance. Minor importance.
Every single House Democrat voted for the bill yesterday. It passed overwhelmingly 85-5 in the Senate. Can you speak to the American people about, one, why you believe every House Democrat supported this piece of legislation? Two, how do you square what the press secretary said last night about it being one of the most significant pieces of legislation, and the president saying it's of minor importance this morning, an hour before he was set to sign it?
Yeah.
How do you square all of that for the American people who went to sleep last night expecting this bill to be signed into law and now are hearing from you all that the president's not going to sign it? How do you square that for the American people?
Look, I mean, these posters and the president's words kind of speak for themselves. He doesn't care about their financial situation. That's the answer. And it's very clear that his press secretary doesn't speak for him. She's making stuff up on the fly, and clearly is detached from what he is thinking about policy and legislation. And I don't know if that's because of what the vice chair said and his inability to stay awake in meetings, or if he just changes and doesn't tell anybody his viewpoints. But it's clear he doesn't care about the American public. It's clear he doesn't care about the costs that people are facing. This is a significant piece of housing legislation. Every House Democrat voted for it, as you mentioned. Every Senate Democrat voted for it. The only no votes were from House and Senate Republicans. This is something that will move the needle in an affordability way for housing. It is one small piece, and Democrats have a variety of ideas and policies that will also help. But this was one piece, and it also shows that we're willing to take a win for the American people. We don't want to play politics and punt. We want to take the win for the American people and drive down the costs of housing and make it easier for people to live in this country. Sure.
No, I agree.
Thank you. I have a question for Chairwoman Dilbene.
These are my favorite questions.
Can you walk me through how DTRIP has looked to protect incumbents like Bolton and Espaillat? I know that the DTRIP has become involved in Democratic primaries that are happening in currently Republican districts. But how involved is the DCCC in primaries where incumbents are being challenged in these districts that are in these districts that are safely Democratic?
Our focus is on the districts that get us the majority. So our map is these purple districts across the country. And that is our focus. Clearly, as a caucus, and other members of the caucus have been involved in other races. But from a DCCC perspective, our big focus in New York is New York 17 and making sure we have a great candidate there. And we do with Kate Conley. And another seat that we will win and help us take back the majority. And we also saw Ben McAdams win in Utah, and so excited to see him come through the primary and on his path to come join us next Congress.
Other questions?
Because we have seen several incumbents lose to Democratic Socialists, does this signal a shift in the party? And are you concerned that this plays into the rhetoric of the president saying that Democrats are too extreme?
No, not at all. I think that this represents a shift of what the voters in a couple of these districts around the country view. But we understand that much of that is based on their frustration and anxiety and the economic uncertainty that people face. And voters are going to take it out in different ways. We have also seen under the DCCC's leadership, Democrats in special elections over the past 12 months have outperformed Republicans by 13 points. So significant growth. So this doesn't have anything to do with Democratic voters. In essence, this is a recoil against Trump and Trump policies. But voters have that ability to make those decisions in Democratic primaries, and we'll work with whoever that they send. In the back.
With these wins that we saw in New York, Donnie saw significant wins with his 3 parent team goals. Just nationwide, do you think the Democratic Socialist movement is going to spread to other sectors of the map?
No, the vice chair and I are from California. There are Democratic Socialists who run for city council races and races in Congress as well. People have a right to vote. That is our democratic system. I don't take anything more from it. The mayor made some decisions and made some political calculations. Those individuals will come and they'll serve here in the Democratic caucus, and they will be part of us getting to 218 votes to win the majority. That's our focus, and that has been our mission since Republicans took control and since Republicans took healthcare away from millions of people just to give benefits to billionaires and corporations. And that's what we'll continue to focus on. And I think that everybody who caucuses on the Democratic side believes in that and will vote accordingly on January 3rd. Thank you so much.
You can take it.
Good afternoon. I call this meeting of the House Democratic Steering and Policy Committee to order. On behalf of all the co-chairs, the House Democratic Caucus, and myself, I want to thank all of you for joining this time-sensitive hearing on threats to elections. And our witnesses today will walk us through these dangers, and we will hear from them shortly. But before we dive in, I want to frame the larger conversation. The Broward County constituents that I talk to every day share one single unifying concern. How are they going to pay their bills? From gas, groceries, rent, and health insurance, life is just too damn expensive. They can't get ahead, no matter how hard they try. And because Republicans have no answers to address the surging cost of living, they join in with Donald Trump to focus on rigging the election rules. That's why Trump just blindsided a good and bipartisan piece of legislation that can address our neighbors' concerns about housing costs by refusing to sign the 21st Century Road to Housing bill and throwing a tantrum. And it's fitting that he's holding it hostage for an elections bill that would address a non-existent problem by making it harder for tens of millions of Americans to vote. And it's Trump's broader assault on America's election security that we'll focus on today. Like any public infrastructure, our local ballot boxes need upkeep and security funding to ensure a free and fair process. Despite pleas for help from election officials, Republicans in Congress are starving them of the resources they need, slashing last year's already insufficient allocation by 2/3 down to a measly $15 million for the whole country. Trump wasted that much on a no-bid contract to repaint the reflecting pool. And just as artificial intelligence is unleashed, Trump has unraveled cybersecurity efforts between CISA, Homeland Security, and local election officials. At the same time, Trump wants to usurp states and local election experts to make it harder for minorities and low-income parents to cast a ballot. He's pushed unconstitutional voter ID, mail-in ballot, and voting system rules that are being challenged in courts, and partisan Republicans on the Supreme Court have systematically gutted the Voting Rights Act and ignored voter-backed anti-gerrymandering laws, allowing Republican governors in states like mine to carve up communities. Of course, none of that helps on their bills or see a doctor. But if Trump can't convince the American people to vote for his failed agenda, he's more than happy to break the rules to suppress their vote. And Trump's persistent election lies provide the distraction and cover-up he needs to keep up his cascade of corruption so he and his cronies can enrich themselves by the billions. And Americans get it. My Broward County neighbors know that Trump's Qatari jet, gilded ballrooms, and pay-to-play pardons don't help any of them pay their mortgage or their rent. They know that when Trump creates a $2 billion slush fund for January 6th rioters, Social Security doesn't get more solvent. Everyone outside the president's cult can see the obvious connection between these high prices and all his rabid corruption and voter fraud conspiracies. But if anyone is unclear about it, we're going to clear it up today. So thank you again for joining us. And now I'll hand it off to our Democratic leader and the next Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Hakeem Jeffries.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much to Steering and Policy Co-Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Let me also thank our Steering and Policy Co-Chairs Robin Kelly and Annette Barragan for once again convening us, particularly on this incredibly important subject around election integrity and continuing to lean in on behalf of the people of the United States of America in our 250th year. Let me also thank Ranking Member Joe Morelli, who has been doing a tremendous job leading the charge to ensure that the principle of free and fair elections in the United States of America is uplifted and validated as we approach the all-important midterm elections, where it's the American people who should have the ability in an unfettered way to decide who is in the majority in the House and in the Senate and who serves them in public office all across the United States of America. I'm thankful to our extraordinary panel of witnesses, Michael, Maya, Gretchen, and Robert, for your presence here today, your leadership, and for sharing your insight and wisdom with the American people here on Capitol Hill, and for all that you are doing to protect the integrity of our elections as we move forward. Donald Trump and Republicans, who have been in complete control of government since January of 2025, have been a complete and total failure. Donald Trump and Republicans promised to lower costs on day one, but costs haven't gone down, costs have gone up. in the United States of America. Life has become more expensive. Donald Trump and Republicans promised to love and cherish Medicaid, and then turned around and enacted the One Big Ugly Bill, which included the largest cut to Medicaid in American history, ripping health care away from millions of Americans all across the country, including in rural America. Donald Trump and Republicans promised not to start wars in the Middle East, but to stop them, and then turned around and launched a reckless and costly war of choice, Operation Epic Failure, that has left the American people less secure, left Iran stronger than they were before the war, and has dramatically increased gas prices and food prices, who are already suffocating in the Trump Republican economy. Donald Trump and Republicans have failed the American people, which is why they've concluded that the only way that they can win in November is to cheat. And that's so inconsistent with who we are as Americans. But Donald Trump, of course, has shown openly his willingness to challenge the principle of free and fair elections here in the United States of America. He's continued to spread lies about the 2020 and 2024 presidential elections. He's continued to promote reckless conspiracy theories. And he, of course, has continued to hire in high levels of governmental office election deniers and January 6th violent insurrectionists. This is all leading to an attack on the upcoming 2026 elections. And he will use every weapon at his disposal connected to the federal government to sow distrust and destroy the integrity of our elections, which is why, not as Democrats or Republicans, but as Americans, the effort to make sure that there are free and fair elections in the United States of America as the central tenet of representative democracy is so important. That's why this hearing is so important. That's why this effort is so important, particularly in the face of the Supreme Court recklessly gutting the Voting Rights Act and setting in motion Jim Crow-like tactics, hiding in plain sight throughout the Deep South. America deserves better. Our democracy deserves better. The children and their future in representative democracy deserve better. And so we stand ready to protect our elections, to ensure that it's the American people, not Donald Trump and his corrupt tactics, are the ones who determine who gets to serve them in Congress and in public office across the land. So let me thank again our witnesses. We look forward to your testimony. And it's now my honor to yield to a fellow New Yorker, upstate New York, but a tremendous advocate for the people of the Empire State and all across the country, particularly as it relates to election integrity, the ranking member and future chair of the House Administration Committee, my friend, Joe Morelli.
Thank you so much, Mr. Leader. It's a privilege to be here with the steering and policy hearing on protecting American democracy, and I want to thank co-chairs Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Robin Kelly and Annette Barragan for convening us, for their leadership and always for their friendship. Thank all my other colleagues who are here as well for your partnership on so many important issues, and to the folks who've been here to testify, thank you for your leadership and all you do, certainly in this moment, but every moment, to defend democracy. And I want to thank Hakeem Jeffries. His leadership, first of all, of our caucus, has provided an indispensable check on this administration, on all of the things that they've done to break, shatter protocols, to violate the Constitution, to violate American law, and he has kept us together, kept us pointed in the right direction, to remind us that the main thing is the main thing. We've got to make that the main thing, and that's addressing the needs of the American people. And I want to thank him for his strong support and engagement on the whole issue of protecting American democracy and in these elections. We communicate daily on this, and he continues to remind us how vital this is. And truly, the health of the democracy is the security of our elections, the strength of public trust in government. Each of these are not only critical, but they're necessary elements and components of this 250-year experiment that we ironically celebrate this year with President Trump as the person in the White House. But there is nothing, in my view, more urgent in this moment than protecting American democracy, which is why this gathering today is, among many that we're hearing, so important. And just to remind people of the threats we face, the president and his allies want to take over this election. They make it clear. As I think Leader Jeffries often says, the president says the quiet part out loud. I guess we can at least give him credit for that. Whether it's the Save America Act, which would disrupt election administration, keep millions of eligible voters away from the polls, force states to hand over private personal voter data to DHS. He has issued illegal executive orders, and thank you to the courts for stepping in appropriately, but that would block access again to the ballot for millions of Americans, including an attempt to eviscerate vote by mail, as many of us know, particularly in states out west, is the primary method by which Americans in the millions cast their votes and have cast it that way for decades. Yesterday, as we all know here, impulsively canceling a signing ceremony about something that had nothing to do with elections to insert himself into and try to once again leverage the United States Senate on the blocked Save America Act. And his tantrum proves one thing. He would rather see Americans on the street than at the ballot box. It's true. He would rather see people on the streets than at the ballot box because he fears the judgment of the American people. So when you fear the answer, I guess you do everything you can to avoid the answer. And the situation and the threats grow more dire. He has, and people around him have continued to muse about deploying the military or law enforcement. He has indicated his regret for not calling out the National Guard in the advent of the 2020 election. And we find ourselves in a moment where democracy's traditional defenders are not. They are now threats. The Department of Justice is a threat. Department of Homeland Security, which has dismantled its election security apparatus, is a threat. The administration has defunded and gutted Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency and its support for election administrators around the country. And now with the Louisiana versus Calais, the Supreme Court has demolished yet another pillar of the Voting Rights Act that upholds our multiracial democracy, a law that for nearly 6 decades, with broad bipartisan support over the years, is now shredded by this Supreme Court. So in the face of all this, the committee that I have the privilege of leading has jurisdiction over federal elections. We've undertaken this assessment of the threats, how House Democrats and pro-democracy allies can stand up and stand together, push back against these threats. Our planned targeted responses include litigation, effective community organization and mobilization, and promoting early voting. Everybody in America should vote at the first moment that they have. I have a friend back home who goes early voting, 6 a.m. it opens, 6:01. He's the first person to vote. And he always says to me, just in case I get hit by a bus, I want my vote to count. Now, that's the kind of democracy devotion that we need by all Americans. So we're going to continue to work with our partners and advocates who are here, and thank you, and protect American elections. Failure, quite simply, is not an option. It cannot be. And because of the corruption, the culture of corruption of Republicans in Washington have real costs, as my friend Chairman Wasserman Schultz outlined. Americans are struggling to afford gas and groceries. The president wastes millions on vanity projects. He sends taxpayer money to billionaire donors while simultaneously cutting their taxes, adding to the federal debt, and then requiring people who need nutritional assistance or health insurance to fill out more paperwork and more certifications. Protecting our democracy doesn't end with protecting just the elections. We have to restore American trust, and so fundamentally reforming our courts, reforming the Congress, reforming our electoral system, reforming the executive branch, all things that we are collectively doing, getting dark money out of our politics and holding ourselves accountable. So it's a large project and a necessary one, and I'm grateful to be working with everyone on this. And so I'm grateful to the panelists here and look forward to hearing from them. So thank you so much.
Thank you to Ranking Member Morelli for all of your work. Thank you to the leader and my co-chairs for putting this hearing together. It's a very timely hearing. I want to thank all the witnesses that are here today as well for your expertise, your advice, your guidance, for all that you do to keep our elections free and fair. Our democracy is under attack, and Donald Trump will stop at nothing to tamper with our elections. One of the concerns I hear a lot is from people worried about even going to the ballot box and whether there's going to be ICE officials, whether there's going to be law enforcement there. That concern is real, and that, I think, is intended to cause people not to go to the ballot box. And then we're hearing threats of maybe we won't deliver your mail-in ballot unless states give us voter lists. So this is an ongoing attack, and we, of course, I know yesterday the president refused to sign the housing bill because he's demanding this Dangerous Save Act bill get passed by the Congress, which would make it harder for Americans to vote. And so the fight for democracy and justice is far from over, and we look forward to hearing from experts like yourselves and advocates who can advise us on the best ways to fight back and really conveying those to our constituents who are so concerned about making sure that they have their ability to vote and that it's not going to be disrupted. And so with that, I get to introduce the first witness here today. It's my honor to introduce Michael Wallman, a constitutional lawyer, a writer, and a leading voice on American democracy. President and CEO of the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU School of Law, Michael has led the center since 2005. He also served as director of speechwriting for President Bill Clinton and was responsible for nearly 2,000 speeches, including 4 State of the Unions and 2 inaugural addresses. More recently, Michael served as a member of the Presidential Commission on the Supreme Court of the United States. You may recognize Michael from his many TV and radio appearances or from his articles published in the New York Times and the Washington Post. You may also know him as the author of numerous books, such as The Fight to Vote, which details the history of our struggle to secure voting rights for all Americans. Michael, I want to thank you for your continuous work to protect our right to vote, making sure our voices are heard. And with that, you are now recognized.
Thank you so much, Representative Barragan. Thank you, Leader Jeffries, Ranking Member Morelli, Chair Wasserman Schultz, and all of you on this committee for having this important conversation. The vote is the heart of democracy. It is utterly vital that we have a free and fair and secure election. And as has been said, and as you know, President Trump and his administration have a concerted campaign underway to undermine the election. It's important to understand that has never happened before in American history. What I want to report to you today, with everything going on, is we know what this strategy is, and now there is clear a counter strategy, protections by state and county officials, by voting rights groups and civil society groups, by law enforcement that actually can protect voters and ensure that we can have the kind of election we want to have. And all of you have a critical role that you are playing and can continue to play going forward. What are the strategies? We know they're trying to abuse executive power. Breaking news, earlier today, a federal court blocked the most recent executive order by President Trump. This is the one on vote by mail. They made clear presidents have no role under the Constitution in administering elections. Congress obviously is being enlisted as well, and you all have been the leaders in the fight against the egregious SAVE Act. We're really grateful for it. Nobody's going to want to make predictions, but we know that it has been blocked so far in the Senate. We know they are weaponizing the Department of Justice. They have demanded sensitive voter rolls from 48 of the states, and now 9 courts, 9-0, have ruled that this is illegal, that there is no legal justification for this, and states are saying no. We've heard about the defunding and the pulling the support off the beat for election officials,
Many people, including former security officials and law enforcement and many others, are stepping up to help county and state and local election officials deal with security threats and deal with all the kinds of threats there are. Now, I don't want to be naive. There continue to be things we're particularly worried about. We'll hear about them. The new and emerging attacks by the FBI on voter registration groups in particular, as we saw in Ohio, is of deep concern. The risk that has not happened yet of the use of ICE or troops or other law enforcement at the polls is also of great concern, though I will point out emphatically, and we all need to remember, that is entirely illegal. In every way, we believe courts will step up when should that happen. But all of that points to what our role and your role can be. We need to be encouraging and assuring people that their vote will be secure. We need to have, in effect, what happened in Minneapolis. We need neighbors helping neighbors, a civic mobilization to protect the vote so that people who are scared, who have reason to be scared, in fact can vote early, can vote with support from their fellow citizens. I'll mention one other thing. If we do all those things, we can have a free and fair and secure election, and voters will have their say. As has been said by Representative Morelli, we think it's utterly vital that the response to this moment be reforms and changes in how our system works so we don't have to fight these kinds of defensive trench battles over and over again. Throughout American history, it is after periods of abuse, after scandal, after corruption, that's when reform happens. It doesn't always happen, but that is when it happens. And you all may have an opportunity to be part of that. You know what kinds of reforms you're talking about as relates to corruption, a critical issue to so many voters, banning partisan gerrymandering, dealing with dark money, new protections for voting rights and against discrimination in voting, and as Leader Jeffries said, dealing with the Supreme Court. We recommend term limits at the very least as one of the reforms. This can be a significant moment, not to have to fight this over and over again, but to make sure that the democracy we all care about, that we cherish, that we love, is stronger coming out of this moment than before. Thank you for holding this hearing.
CEO of Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, a coalition of over 240 national organizations fighting to protect, defend, and expand the rights of every person in the United States, a national leader on civil rights and economic justice. Ms. Wiley has served in numerous high-level positions both inside and outside government. To name just a few, she served as the first Black Women Counsel to the mayor of the city of New York, a faculty member and senior vice president at the New School University, and is a litigator at the ACLU, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. Thank you, Ms. Wiley, for all of your important work and for joining us today.
I did push it. I got this mic. Thank you for having me, and I really want to thank our co-chairs. I want to thank our leader, our ranking member, but also every single member of this committee and all of the work that it represents, because we are the ones we've been waiting for. Because for such a time as these, we know that it is a democracy that has always been one we have had to fight, to protect, and to perfect. And I say this with my dear colleague, Michael, because the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights has been here for 76 years fighting this fight. And I think it is important to note that the challenges I'm about to share are not necessarily new, but the degree, the tenor, the abuse, and the unlawfulness, and its level and depth is. And I say that because this isn't just a return, as we sometimes say, to Jim Crow. It is actually a return to a fight about whether the civil rights amendments of our United States Constitution are going to stand. And that is a substantial fight. But here I want to share with you a bit of what we're seeing out of the coalition, what we're doing about it, and what we can continue to do about it. Everything that Michael has said, I'm not going to repeat. because I'm just going to say that is consistent with the position of the coalition of which the Brennan Center is a member. What I think we need to confront is a couple of very, very clear threats. We have engaged in a landscaping of what our coalition is doing. We have over 240 members. We have 84 national organizations mapped in the data I'm about to share. So number one is the coalition is not backing down, and is not slowing down, it is not stopping, and it is not turning around. But what comes out of it is a very clear picture of several important things we've already heard. Major threats include polling place closures, include the reduction in early voting, include staff shortages in election offices, include threats and harassment to those election administrators, and it also includes things like language access. Just want to make this point, 31% of Asians, millions of our Latino voters, Native American population experiencing both language and distances to polls. And as we know, people with disabilities, the elderly, and all manner of people rely on mail-in voting, ballot drop boxes. They're lawful, they're effective, and they support turnout. So I say that, but in addition, the gerrymandering has come up, and mis and disinformation as major challenges at a level unseen in recent memory for all the reasons that Michael has just shared. And part of what is happening now is both a challenge to disinformation. One example, just one, but that we're hearing from many places, is a Black man, 70 years old in Louisiana, asking at a community meeting whether after the Calais decision, he still has a right to vote. The disinformation is real, it's significant, and it actually, this is a different kind of threat than even whether the polling site is open or the ballot box is available, right? Not because those are they're not, they're significant. But the very fact that people are wondering if their rights are in place is a consequence of the Calais decision, and one that requires the kinds of activity and action that this coalition undertakes every day, and that this group of leaders here has so much opportunity to help us confront collectively. I'll say this other thing. It's very clear where and how the coalition is seeing the threats as a priority. So, for example, greatest coverage for the coalition is not going to surprise you. But we are showing up in literally 28 states in a very deep level. But it is also clear that folks are calling out Florida, Texas, North Carolina, Michigan, Arizona, and Wisconsin as real, clear, and present danger for voters. Those are not the only places, but just to say that's one thing we're hearing out of our data. And the other is this, and I think this is extremely important to note. Our members are all in. They're not slowing down, they're not backing down. They're doing it with less resources than they've ever had before, despite the degree of threat. And we're seeing in our data, 44% of our member organizations are doing what they're doing on 25% of the budget. So when we consider the incredible amount of work we have, the breadth of that work, when we see the challenges to the ability to do that, that is also something we have to confront together, because it is a turnout issue. Turnout for us is a nonpartisan issue. We don't care if you're a rural community or urban community. We don't care and tell people who to vote for or whether to vote. This impacts every voter. This is about the ability of our people to deliver a pink slip or a hiring offer to those leaders who are going to decide the things that our folks want to hear about and care about, which is they don't just want to be told about whether or not they have a right to vote. They want to be told about whether that vote is going to solve their problems. And as we have already heard, the places that are under attack, it's because communities are asking for Medicaid. It is because communities are asking about SNAP benefits. It is because communities are asking about whether their hospitals are going to stay open and whether or not women and children are going to die for lack of health care. And Head Start is another one. So when we talk about the corruption that we're seeing, that we have heard about, the fact that we're seeing $75 billion in 1 year go to ICE to take our rights, at the same time that we're taking $75 billion out of the healthcare system, it is clear why voters want to have a say in who leads them, and this is why we see the attacks on the very existence of our work, on our organizations, from Southern Poverty Law Center to the Ohio Organizing Collaborative. And while part of our fight has been to even defend the rights to simply do the work to educate, to engage, to support, and to empower. But we won't stop, and we know you won't, and this is work we do together.
Thank you to our witnesses and everyone joining us for today's important discussion. As co-chair of the House Democratic Steering and Policy Committee, I'm proud to convene and partake in this hearing focused on safeguarding our nation's elections and strengthening the foundation of our democracy. Free, fair, and secure elections are the foundation of our democratic system. Americans must be able to cast their ballots with confidence, knowing that elections are protected from interference, intimidation, and manipulation. Election security is more than voting machines. It requires protecting election workers, defending against foreign influence, maintaining strong cybersecurity systems, and ensuring that state and local election officials have the resources they need to do their jobs. Unfortunately, recent actions by the Trump administration have raised serious concerns about our nation's election security infrastructure, election security grants, critical funding that helps states to modernize voting systems and strengthen cybersecurity. They have been significantly reduced. While Congress appropriated $45 million for election security grants in fiscal year 2026, only $15 million was ultimately allocated. At the same time, key election security personnel with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, were placed on administrative leave, weakening federal support for state and local election officials and reducing our ability to respond to threats from foreign adversaries and other bad actors. Despite these challenges, election officials across the country continue to work tirelessly to uphold the integrity of our elections and maintain public trust in the democratic process. Today's hearing is an opportunity to examine these threats, learn from experts on the front lines of election administration, and discuss how Congress can strengthen election security for the future. With that, I'm honored to introduce our next witness, Gretchen Ronmeyer. Gretchen has served as Arlington's County General Registrar and Director of Elections since 2019 and brings more than 2 decades of election administration experience, beginning as a poll worker in Texas at age 18. She has held numerous leadership roles in election administration, including serving as co-chair of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Government's Election Officials Technical Committee, LONG, and as an active member of the Voter Registrars Association of Virginia. Ms. Ronmeyer, thank you for being here today, and we look forward to your testimony.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm honored to represent more than 10,000 local election administrators across the United States. Together, we take on an enormous task of mobilizing the largest civilian workforce in support of democracy in the world. I'm referring to the roughly 1 million poll workers who will volunteer to serve their community and let their neighbors' voices be heard on November 3rd. They speak to the heart of our nation, not just having the right to vote, but that the willingness of ordinary citizens to make that vote possible. I've been asked to speak about threats to our democracy, and I'd like to start there. The quiet civic backbone of our election system is under strain in ways that aren't always visible. 40% of election administrators in Connecticut have retired in the last 5 years. 4 weeks ago, my 82-year-old mother was recruited to run a precinct in Texas because there simply weren't enough other workers available. And just this month, a jurisdiction in Virginia lost 2 of its 3 staff right as early voting has begun. These are not isolated stories. They reflect a nationwide challenge in recruiting and retaining election workers. The reason is simple. Elections are becoming more complex and the environment more scrutinized. Since 2019, my office has implemented sweeping changes, such as no excuse absentee voting, early voting, same-day registration, automatic voter registration, ballot curing, drop boxes, post-election audits, ranked choice voting, and more. Every one of these changes adds processes, time, training, and cost. 10 years ago, an election might cost $70,000 to run in Arlington. The special election that I just ran in April cost $250,000. That's a 250% increase in the last decade. At the same time, funding hasn't kept pace. In the 17 years I've been with Arlington, our office has received $130,000 in federal funding. Most of this, $123,000, was from the CARES Act in 2020. $90,000 of that was spent on one-time funds on envelopes and postage for mail ballots that November. It was the support we needed that year, and I'm grateful that Congress recognized the need. Compounding this complexity is the growing role of litigation. Court decisions now force changes in the middle of elections, creating uncertainty for administrators and voters alike. And voters are paying attention, but not always in a way that's helpful. National headlines can create confusion at the local level. For example, this spring, voters expressed confusion about voter ID requirements in Virginia because of conversations about the SAVE Act, even though our rules in Virginia haven't changed. Local election administrators have one goal: to serve voters and deliver free, fair, and secure elections. I am appointed. I do not represent a political party, and my role is to implement your policies and help voters navigate the process with confidence. So how can Congress help? First, invest in poll workers. Invest in their recruitment, training, and compensation. And you can do this by things like passing the Poll Worker Tax Credit Act to support the workforce. Making the $200 stipend that poll workers receive on Election Day tax exempt could increase recruitment, but also reduce the administrative cost of hiring these workers that only work 1 or 2 days a year. Second, provide dedicated, predictable funding for election technology with a local spend requirement. Right now, limited certified options are driving up cost and making it harder to meet security requirements. Congress needs to support the EAC's work, and communities need your support for getting the best election technology into the hands of America's voters. Third, continue conversations like this and engage directly with your local election offices. Seeing their work firsthand can make a difference, and they'd love to tell you about their creative solutions for tackling these problems. Thank you for your time today and for your commitment to supporting our democracy.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ronnemeyer. And now I'd like to introduce someone who I think probably doesn't need an introduction for many of us, and that's Robert Reiner, whose election credentials are extraordinary. He's currently the director of the Voting Rights Project at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and previously served as a senior counsel in the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. He also clerked for the influential Judge Friendly and the voting rights legend Justice Thurgood Marshall. Mr. Weiner, can you share what you see as the threat landscape for elections right now? And thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chair Wasserman Schultz, Ranking Member Morelli, and members of this committee. Your focus on the threats to our elections is timely and it's vital. I think we're at a hair on fire moment right now. The Trump administration is systematically undermining every institution that protects our electoral institutions. Now, let me be clear. Our elections are safe and they're reliable, and they will remain that way. But the president's statements, his incessant attacks on the integrity and the safety of our elections, is creating confusion and distrust. And with the new head of the Office of National Intelligence, we're going to see those attacks escalating with regard to foreign influence. Beyond that, we've seen subpoenas, investigations, and threats against election officials and voting rights advocates. We've seen teasers regarding ICE agents and military at the polls, as well as seizure of ballots and voting machines. We've seen efforts to restrict mail-in voting. What is going on, in my view, is that the Trump administration is trying to create chaos and then use the chaos that it creates as a reason not to respect the results of our elections. Now, we've brought a number of lawsuits to counter this at the Lawyers Committee, but litigation is not by itself a solution. And that's why we call upon a broad coalition, the Election Protection Coalition. It unites more than 300 national and state level groups to ensure that voters can cast their ballots and have them counted. It's the largest nonpartisan voter protection program in the country. And the center is our hotline, 866 Our Vote, a year-round, nationwide, nonpartisan, multilingual helpline. We receive reports through that hotline. We work with public officials to solve the problem. And if need be, we sue. Among the issues, we've seen a rise in voter intimidation from 5% of the calls received in 2025 to 10% this year. We're developing rapid response plans to deal with that by both intimidation, by both public and private actors. And we're seeking to prepare ourselves and public officials. We'll be mapping state violence by militias across the country, and we'll coordinate closely throughout the year, share resources, do training, and develop a rapid response effort to deal with the threats as they arise. We need your help to fortify this election protection movement. Used to be, we could rely on DOJ observers, no longer. They're counterproductive, if anything. So we need to mobilize attorneys, clergy, college students, ordinary citizens to support democracy. We need poll workers and observers inside and outside of polling places. There's a delicate balance here. We all need to recognize and announce and publicize the election threats, but we also need to shore up public support and confidence in our elections. The key message is that our elections are safe, they're reliable, they are democratic, and we intend to keep them that way. Thank you for your efforts to do just that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Weiner. Now we'll open it up to our members' questions, and first we'll start with our Democratic Caucus Chair, Pete Aguilar of California.
Thank you so much, Co-Chair Wasserman Schultz. It's an honor to be here. Good afternoon. I want to thank House Administration Committee Ranking Member Joe Morelli, the entire Steering and Policy Committee, and Leader Jeffries, in addition to all of our witnesses and guests for bringing us here. Donald Trump and Republicans have launched an all-out war on voting rights and free and fair elections in this country that will have repercussions in every corner of our communities. In the nearly 60 days since the conservative majority on the Supreme Court gutted the VRA, we've seen Republican-led states aggressively move to eliminate majority black districts across the South through the Jim Crow-era racial gerrymandering. Far-right extremists did not hesitate to immediately redraw Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Florida to shut out voters from our political process. And the consequences of Louisiana versus Calais won't end in the South, and it will hurt and impact voters nationwide. Because if we allow Republicans to dilute the voting power of communities of color anywhere in this country, we run the risk of turning back decades of progress for fair and equal representation. And these attacks on voting power and our nation's democracy by right-wing extremists who want to take this country backwards are just the beginning. Trump and Republicans have made no secret that they're doing everything in their power to overhaul our federal elections to ensure they have an advantage in the upcoming midterm election. We've seen this just this week with Trump's refusal to sign a bipartisan affordable housing bill unless Congress passed the Save America Act, his voter suppression bill that he claims will guarantee the midterms and make it so Republicans for 50 years will, his words, never lose a race. Donald Trump knows that Republicans cannot win the upcoming midterm elections based on their record alone. So he's choosing to subvert the will of the voters in order to steal the election. Democrats won't sit idly by while Donald Trump tried to steal the 2020 election, and we aren't standing by now. House Democrats will fight in Congress, will fight in the courts, and will fight in our communities to ensure Donald Trump and Republicans don't get away with their attempts to suppress the vote, silence people of color, or rig the 2026 election. Because in America, our democracy is strongest when every voice is heard and every vote is counted. Thank you so much for being here. I yield back.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Next, I'll go to my co-chair, Robin Kelly, for a question.
Just very short and sweet, because of what's been going on. I don't know how you felt before, but do you feel like the Supreme Court, the number should be expanded? We can just go down real quick.
Well, I will say this. There's an active conversation happening now in the coalition about the breadth of reforms that we need. There's strong agreement that the reforms need to be very significant. There is an ongoing conversation about what that whole package looks like, but it is clear that it has to be significant. It has to be structural. I would say there is agreement on term limits. Obviously, there's agreement on binding ethics. And there's a conversation about expansion. So this is one that is going to be one that we will speak about coalitionally. And I would say no one is shying away from the fact that if we are going to continue democracy, we have to have the Supreme Court that is not ideologically captured, but is that its only fealty is to the States of America, and that does include the Civil War Amendment.
And its most recent Fox News poll showed 78% support for an 18-year term limit for members of the Supreme Court. That's obviously a lot of Republicans and independents as well as Democrats. This is something the public wants.
Thank you. I just ask because I'm torn myself, because then when they're in charge, they can expand it more. So I just want to know you guys. Yo back.
Thank you. Councilwoman Susan Benny.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to my steering and policy colleagues. 6 years later, we're no longer at the same moment of global crisis, but vote by mail continues to serve Washingtonians, making it easier for folks to vote, including our service members, to safely and reliably cast their ballots. Trump continues to viciously criticize vote by mail, even calling it mail-in cheating. This narrative is not only false, but also dangerous. As some of you have referred to, there has been no credible evidence of significant voter fraud in Washington, as an example, yet in this past April, he used vote by mail to participate in Florida's special election, and he defended his hypocrisy, stating that because I'm president, and because I've had a lot of different things to do, that's why, he needed to do that. Ms. Wiley, I wondered if you could speak to the importance of ensuring that every American has the same ability to conveniently, safely, and reliably vote by mail, just like the president.
Let's start with the fact that it is true that in 2020, because we had a pandemic, we also saw significantly more participation from people who are too often just blocked from the ballot for access reasons. We know that 1 in 4 Americans are a person with disabilities, and mail-in balloting is an incredibly important way to increase access. You also talked about the fact that we have people in service. People who are elderly, people on reservations who have long distances to the ability and also rely on drop boxes, which we would add to this list. So I say that to say this. It is very clear that for the American voter, there's deep concern about having the ability to vote and not being blocked from the ballot. Mail-in voting is simply voter access to the ballot, and blocking it is not popular, and it is not right, and it is also unfounded.
I wanted to follow up because currently the Supreme Court is considering overturning a Mississippi law that permits the counting of mail-in ballots that were received after Election Day. And I wonder if you could also comment on if the Supreme Court makes a decision and applies that to the 2026 election regarding ballots received after Election Day, what impact do you think that would have?
Well, first let me say, we will all do everything in our power to make sure that there's education of voters about how to get their mail-in ballots in on time. But it is exactly the example of just erecting a barrier rather than solving a problem. Because if the point is that we want voters to be able to vote, what difference does it make as long as it's postmarked by Election Day? That has nothing to do with the integrity of the system. It has nothing to do with whether or not people are lawfully voting. It has everything to do with whether we're just trying to block voters from the ballot. But what we will do, and what we all need to do, is greatly increase the voter education on how to vote. It is why we have the concerns about just the resources that are going to people's just ability to know what is so confusing and being changed constantly. But we'll get there because people's interest and willingness to vote is only on the rise.
And vote early. Thank you. I yield back.
And that's exactly what I was going to suggest as, again, a role that all of you can play is encouraging people to vote as early as possible. The number of ballots that come in after Election Day all over the country is about 775,000 ballots. People can get their ballots in earlier and not be scared off by the Supreme Court if it does the absurd thing of ruling that that is somehow illegal under federal law.
Thank you so much. Next is Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy of Illinois.
Thank you. Ms. Wasserman-Schultz. Thank you to the witnesses. Just picking up on something that Susan Del Bene said, some Republican-run states like Texas and Florida specifically allow mail-in ballots from our military and citizens abroad, among others, that are postmarked by Election Day to be counted after the polls close. Isn't that right, Ms. Wiley?
Yes.
President Trump hasn't alleged any fraud with regard to those ballots, correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
And same with Texas, too. He hasn't alleged fraud with those Texas ballots counted after Election Day, right?
As far as I know.
As this poster points out, Trump's demand to throw out ballots arriving after Election Day would break the law and disenfranchise military voters. That's a severe disservice to our men and women in uniform, among others. Mr. Waldman, I wanted to point out a federal law that you may have alluded to. 18 U.S.C. 592 makes it illegal to deploy federal troops or armed federal law enforcement at any place an election is held. Isn't that right?
Yes.
But in an interview with CNN this month, Secretary Mullins suggested that, quote, if a threat were to arise for whatever reason at a polling place, such as a bomb threat, our ICE agents can have an emergency team respond quickly. These comments are eerily similar to a plot in House of Cards, the TV show, when President Underwood fakes several bomb threats in swing states to justify sending in troops to shut down the polls. And it appears to me that President Trump is setting up exactly the same pretext that President Underwood did in this episode of House of Cards. Mr. Waldman, you also alluded to this. I just want to foot stomp this. In May, Postmaster General Steiner and the Postal Service published a proposed rule that would require states to hand over voter registration data, and if they don't, no mail-in ballots would be delivered in that state, correct?
That's correct.
And again yesterday, Steiner reaffirmed in the Senate that the USPS will not deliver mail-in ballots if states don't give the Trump administration voter rolls, right?
That's correct.
This morning, as you also pointed out rightly, thankfully, a district judge blocked Trump's March executive order on mail-in voting that motivated this potential proposed rule. But let me be clear. I think all of us as a caucus speak with one voice. Mr. Steiner, you are stepping on dangerous territory. If you continue to move forward with this proposed rule, despite the court ruling this morning, I, as a senior member of the Oversight Committee, will move to subpoena you and lead the effort to remove you from your post. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congressman Krishnamurthy. Next, unless Congresswoman Ballant is under a severe time crunch, then Congressman Goodlander has to leave.
I have to leave too.
Okay, then you're next. Congresswoman Rebecca Ballant.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chair, especially for your leadership on this. So we know the president is historically unpopular. He knows it, his team knows it, and he knows the only way that Republicans are going to stay in power is if they meddle in elections. And he is telegraphing that in every possible way. And that is true with his obsession with the SAVE Act. And I just want to just lay it out because I know there's still so much misinformation about the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act is designed to suppress the vote. That's what it's designed to do. Of American citizens who have the right to vote, naturalized citizens, language minorities, voters who are poor or live in rural areas, like in my state, military service members, women who have changed their names after marriage. It is designed to disenfranchise them. When Trump cannot win, he will cheat. He will cheat and then he will lie about an election. He is still lying about the 2020 election. And so many of our colleagues in this body are still lying about the 2020 election. So he's desperate and he needs to use all of the tools at his disposal because he knows if he doesn't do that, he is going to lose because the American public do not support the agenda of this administration. But it's not just the SAVE Act. So I want to lay out for people who may not understand what's happening behind the scenes here in DC. He's weaponized the DOJ and the FBI to rationalize his fantasy that he won the 2020 election. He has issued executive orders to make it more difficult for people to vote. He's used the Department of Homeland Security to intimidate and threaten states for their voter rolls, including my home state of Vermont. And my Secretary of State said, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You will not have our voter rolls. He has cut key funding for election security and infrastructure. So I know that folks like you, you're ground zero. You do the work every day. And I've talked to my poll workers. I know this is an incredibly challenging moment that you find yourselves in. I'm wondering if in the minute that you have to tell us right now in this moment, what are the most difficult aspects of your job in terms of the pressure that you are under?
Thank you so much. Right now, it's just keeping up with all these proposed changes. And I think it's important to note that I don't have legal counsel or legal advisors. So we're operating in a framework of when these executive orders come out, I start getting questions from voters or reporters before I've had time to review what's been published. And when we see legal changes or executive orders, we're going to have to change processes midstream. So to stand up a new voter registration intake process where every single registered voter in Arlington has to come in and show ID in person before Election Day, that is an extremely complicated process that we do not have. We do not have a process in place. We do not have resources. We will make it work. We always do. That is our job. But yeah, it is just hard to keep up with everything that's changing right now.
Thank you for all that you do and all the poll workers across this country. I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Ballant. Next up is Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici from the great state of Oregon.
Thank you so much, Ranking Member Morelli, and also thank you to Steering and Policy Committee and our leadership for being here, but also thank you so much to the witnesses. We know how critical this issue is right now. I know my colleagues, like I am at home, people say to me all the time, I'm really worried. I'm worried about election security because people who qualify have the right to vote and they need to have confidence in the process, and they don't have that right now. I want to follow up on the conversation that my colleague Susan Delbene started. I noted very clearly, she said one of the first to do all vote by mail. It was actually Oregon was the first to do all vote by mail. And I tell you, it really works. We've had it for decades. It's a safe and secure system. We have good turnout. And Oregonians understand that it's a safe system. They also understand that the voter fraud that the administration is alleging is not real. And just to follow up on the recent executive order, which is pretty terrifying to Oregonians, as well as everybody, but especially with this requirement, our Secretary of State because what they're saying is that you will not get your ballot if you don't get the state voter information. And I want to ask you, Mr. Waldman, because I know you're tracking the cases, and I know Mr. Krishnamurthy mentioned, I know the Department of Justice is suing, and the district courts have been dismissing the cases, and I think it was just yesterday, the Sixth Circuit, Michigan does not need to turn over their voter files, but that was an appeals court. We've talked about the Supreme Court. I don't have faith in the Supreme Court. So I want to ask you to kind of work through what would happen in a state like Oregon. We don't have polling places. And if people don't get their ballot, they won't be able to vote. So what do you predict? I mean, can we have some hope that as this works through the system, we don't have to there's no way we can reinvent a voting system where the elections in 150 some days, we don't have polling places. So how would we deal with this? What do you recommend?
So I would say two things. The first is that this recent executive order saying that purporting to order the Postal Service to not deliver lawfully cast ballots unless they comply with a list that doesn't exist yet from the federal government under this DHS is illegal, absurd, and fortunately now the courts are stepping in. And again, today the judge was quite clear in enjoining it as relates to the states, and the voters are asking for a nationwide injunction in the same courtroom from the same judge, and we have a great deal of hope that the judge will rule that way, with every hope that this will in fact not be something that election officials from both parties have to deal with going forward. More broadly, vote by mail, as you say, is used now by 1 in 3 Americans. Right. It's sort of consumer tested. It's never been
it's used by everybody in Oregon.
It's never been partisan on this and on so many other things. I think it's critical that we all find a way, while warning about the dangers, to ensure that people feel confident and that they vote early and they have a plan to vote, and that if they use vote by mail or Dropbox or something like that, that they know that they can do so with confidence. And then we will stop. Fact will beat fear.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. That education piece is going to be really critical, that to reassure people that they will get their ballot and that they should get it in early. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman Bonamici. Next up is Congresswoman Maxine Dexter.
I'm actually Oregon also.
I'm actually from West
Yes.
State. Sorry, from Florida.
But you're not wrong. I grew up in Washington. So good. Thank you, Co-Chair Wasserman Schultz, and our leadership, as well as you all, for coming. The work you're doing to secure our democracy is truly heroic right now. I represent, as you heard, Oregon in the 3rd Congressional, and we indeed were the first state to conduct all mail elections. We've shown for the past 3 decades, just as you've spoken to, that it increases voter turnout. We actually had the highest in our last election. So rather than look to Oregon as a model, this administration is doing everything it can to tear down vote by mail, talked about that. So I want to pivot to voter intimidation, which I think is also clearly part of their playbook. This week, ICE agents entered a polling location and ordered a poll worker, someone that is incredibly important that we should be elevating right now and to take down a social media post. This is voter intimidation. The president has made clear he wants federal agents at polling places. We know that's illegal. we know what that also will do to voters seeing this on social media, hearing about it. My community is responding, saying that the SAVE Act is going to ensure that only citizens vote, all the things that we already know are real. You want us to increase confidence in our elections, and yet the misinformation and the pervasiveness of their commitment to misinformation is extremely threatening. And so I just would ask whoever feels most appropriate for me to ask, we know that this is illegal voter intimidation, and yet they're doing it. We know that this is, frankly, lying about what the SAVE Act will do, and yet they're doing it. How do we combat that? How do we help make voters confident and not intimidated, as well as our poll workers who we so desperately need?
First of all, I just want to know what my friend Michael shared about the fact that litigators are going to litigate quickly. And that's critically important for folks to know now, that it's actually about their rights, about it being unlawful, and that there will be action taken. That's not unimportant as part of the message. The other thing is, look, we as a Civil Rights Coalition fought for and won policies from technology companies to make sure the mis and disinformation online was at least limited or labeled or identified in other ways where the algorithm would reduce the way in which the disinformation spread. The lies about whether it's mail-in voting, whether it's fraud in the 2020 election, and all of the disinformation we're talking about is rampant online. And it is because there have been either capitulation or complicity with nation and lessening the oversight that is lawful, that is not a violation of the First Amendment. So there's a lot that elected leaders can do to say to the technology companies, good policies, they were advancing democracy, they were protecting your user and your user community, and we need you to, what's happening on the ground is quite real. And we have in our faith community, and we've been participating in the trainings, training clergy of all faiths to be mediators at sites in case ICE shows up, and ensuring that we're letting communities know, because one of the things we have learned is that when voters understand there is a protection network for their rights, there are people who will be present, that does make a difference for their sense of ability to show. Is we have to remember the swatting, which is what we were hearing from your colleague around call-ins to polling sites claiming bombing as a pretext. That should be the appropriate local law enforcement and local election officials who make the calls about what happens with that. It's the same type of violation to suggest federal agents play that role. We should make very clear who the trusted leaders are in responding, because we do expect to see an increase in those kinds of swatting calls to try to interrupt people's right to vote. So we're also paying attention to that on the education and engagement front.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Dexter. Next up is Congresswoman Jill Takuda, of Hawaii.
Thank you very much for being here. I have a lot of thoughts, but I have 3 minutes. So I'm going to start by just talking about a few things that really concern me. I serve in the Armed Services Committee. I asked Secretary Hegseth if he would follow the Constitution or follow it when it came to sending military to polls. He could also not answer the question when I asked him if he would follow President Trump's orders to shoot people, innocent people, protesters in the leg. So this gives me great concern that at the end of the day, Donald Trump thinks brown and black voters are the enemy. The Constitution is very clear. Armed enemies of the state are the only way the president can order the military or ICE, law enforcement in general, to go to these election polls. But he sees us as the enemy. And so I have great concern that we can file every lawsuit after the fact, but the fact that he can give the order to Hegseth that day, and armed men and women and service members, sadly, will be forced into an impossible position. Will be there at the polls, threatening voters, dissuading voters from coming. Again, election suppression happening right in our face in violation, blatant violation of the Constitution, but happening in real time. What are we going to do then when all of a sudden the Army shows up at the polls? The other thought I have as I'm thinking about guns at our poll sites is what are we going to do immediately to make sure our election workers are safe? We have laws on the books, we have protections. But at the end of the day, what do we have to do now to ensure that every election worker before that election day and after that election day, and especially during that election day, can be safe? Is there anything we've got to work with our states to pass right now in terms of protections and different, liabilities and exemptions and anything it has, resources, what do we need to do? Because I have great fear that yes, there is the guns, but there's also the threats upon our election teams that make democracy work. And then just in a practical sense then, we've got all this spinning in our head. We're in the minority. What can we practically do now when we do not have the numbers to pass a bill for workers to keep Donald Trump away from first bill we better not when we put in our hand to make sure that we in 19 seconds.
Okay,
We have a little flexibility because
Okay.
we're.
First of all, I want to say that even not having the gavel, representatives have some very powerful tools, including for that type of emergency situation. And this is actually something we shared with the Congressional Black Caucus at one point. But the ability of representatives to organize with your community leaders, peaceful turnout, sort of mediating military. So that's actually vital. It's something we saw this criminal prosecution of LaMonica MacGyver, but we should not allow that to be a threat that prevents what is an actual organizing opportunity for our electeds to do with community leaders, including faith leaders. Remember when I said that there's an organizing of faith leaders to be those moral leaders who are on the ground to mediate. But there is a real opportunity to be prepared for that, organize for that, and peacefully be present. The second thing I would say is in terms of we are working as a coalition to make sure you have the things to drive. But even without conversations like these and having more of these community conversations that empower where how local community leaders can be active, it's peaceful, but it's also responsive to anything that happens day of, is an incredibly important amount of work to do now, and we're happy to partner with you on that.
And I will add two things. Law enforcement can play a very significant role, and you as members can be interacting with local law enforcement on this. There's an organization that we and others are part of, the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections. Nationwide, it's partly law enforcement, police, sheriffs, prosecutors, and partly election officials from both parties, so that beat cops are going to have pocket guides on how to protect the elections all over the country. That can play a significant role in protecting election officials and giving voters greater confidence. The other thing I would say is the business community needs to step up. You think about in 2020, the business community, big businesses mobilized about 600,000 people to be poll workers because of COVID. They can make this a civic, nonpartisan mobilization that will calm the waters and diminish the chance that any of these things will happen.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Takuda. Next up is Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon from Pennsylvania.
Thank you so much. I want to thank the Steering and Policy Committee for holding this hearing and bringing together the combined expertise of these witnesses for the benefit of the American people. We've got a lot of disinformation to push back on. One of the enduring legacies of this president is going to be the extent to which he has undermined the faith of the American people in our elections, claiming without truth and without justification that American elections are not safe or reliable, that non-citizens regularly vote, or that results can't be trusted. None of that is true. The reality is our elections are administered by dedicated public servants, members of our local communities, our neighbors, backed by rigorous safeguards, bipartisan oversight, and local officials working to ensure that every vote is counted. This should not be a partisan issue. But instead of strengthening the systems that keep elections reliable, Republicans continue pushing lies and costly legislation like the Save America Act, which would disenfranchise millions of American citizens, especially women, young people, and low-income voters. Non-citizen voting is already illegal. All of our states have in place systems that ensure only citizens can register to vote. The argument is made that it's common sense to have voter ID, but the devil is in the details, and specifically which types of ID are allowed. And I want to speak directly to Pennsylvanians on this one. The Save America Act would really rely upon you having a passport or a real ID showing citizenship. Now, in Pennsylvania, less than half of Pennsylvanians have passports. And in order to get one, it's going to cost you at least $175 and months in order to get that passport. No Pennsylvanians have a real ID that will allow them to register to vote under the Save America Act. So it's going to be a massive cost and expense. The estimate is that at a time when families are already struggling with higher costs, this bill would cost Americans over $19 billion. $19 billion is a hell of a poll tax. So instead of manufacturing problems that don't exist, we should be working on actually strengthening our systems, making sure that our systems have the resources they need to make it easy for every citizen to vote. Mr. Waldman, you mentioned that today the federal court has declared an executive order unconstitutional for trying to federalize elections by ordering DHS to make a list of citizens and directing the Postal Service to interfere in mail-in voting. And yesterday, I think we had congressional testimony by the head of the Postal Service saying, yep, he was going to go along with that unconstitutional order. Can you tell us why this is such a problem?
The way you describe it, sort of what could go wrong with that scenario. The Postal Service has an important role to play, and it sometimes struggles to play even that role, to demand or purport to order that the independent Postal Service run the elections and determine who is eligible to vote is not only illegal, unconstitutional, and outrageous, it's absurd to think that it could ever actually lead to anything other than chaos. I do think that the courts, who play an important, if limited, role, will step up here, as they have begun to on this. The Postal Service cannot be deciding whether a state, in its lawful exercise of its powers under the Constitution, is properly running its elections.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah.
I could just say, the problems with voting in this country are not who is voting, but who isn't.
That's fair. That's fair. And I just want to thank, I think almost every one of you, if not every one of you, has mentioned how important it is that citizens step up and be ambassadors for democracy by working at the polls, because you can help the system work. And you can also explain to people why our elections are so reliable and safe. So thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Scanlon. Next is Congresswoman Delia Ramirez of the great state of Illinois.
Thank you so much, Chair. The great state of Illinois. Well, first, let me just say how incredibly grateful I am for this opportunity and this conversation, and having the steering policy co-chairs have all of you witnesses here today to talk about how do we, in fact, defend democracy? How do we, in fact, defend election integrity? And what is the path forward so that we're never here again? So I want to thank you for being here. You know, when people talk about the possibility of democratic backsliding in the United States, I've been very clear. That possibility is gone. We are here, right? From big unaccountable money in politics, buying representation, to authoritarians that are attempting to erode free and fair elections. And frankly, what we were just seeing with Supreme Court decisions and spreading this white nationalist terror to disenfranchise Black, brown, low-income voters, the very foundations of our democracy are in fact under attack. You know, I heard you say, Mr. Wiener, just a moment ago, the problem is not who is voting, it's about who is not voting. And I'll tell you that when I hear from constituents constantly, they're so darn tired of the fights. They're so tired of super PACs, shell PACs, billionaires, mega corporations, suppressing their voice at the ballot box, attempting to buy elections, silence our communities. And they want to know that the person that they're electing is in fact the person that represents them. And frankly, our communities are also tired of being under siege by Trump's national paramilitary force, ICE. Today, as Trump deploys ICE at his whim, seizes voting records, holds bipartisan bills hostage, while he attacks free and fair elections, we're collectively confronting the threat of a president who is lining up the pieces to perpetrate a coup. I don't say this lightly, but here's where we are. Our communities are tired of having the same fights that their grandparents fought against white supremacists who would seek to keep Black and brown voters from exercising their voting rights and realizing change at the ballot box. And it's why today's roundtable is so incredibly important to me, because it's naming a reality and resisting it. That attack on elections and restrictions on who gets to exercise their right to vote, because we know it's about control, we know it's about consolidating power, about remaining in office against the will of the people. And to that, I think you hear from our colleagues here, we're saying hell no. Ms. Reinmeyer, Access reported that HSI agents demanded voting information from 2 counties in North Carolina and Texas. Could you tell me from your perspective what you foresee the impact of these actions will be on local elections to voters?
It's a good question. So I think it's important to note that states have laws about who they can release that data to. And so when we hear states not turning over data, it's because there are laws in place in our states to prohibit the turnover of this data. And we have to think about why are people requesting this data? And there is an effort to clean voter rolls, find duplicate voters, find potential non-citizens. And I think that's what we're working towards, is to have some kind of voter list maintenance program at the federal level. That is my assumption.
Got it. Thank you. I know my time is up, so I'll go ahead and yield back to the chair, but thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Ramirez. Next up is Congresswoman Lucy McBath of Georgia.
Madam Chair, I really, really appreciate being here, and as one who's been gerrymandered 3 times, definitely, I'm really glad to have our witnesses here. Thank you so much for appearing before us. This year, we're going to actually celebrate the 61st anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, but our fight for the right to vote continues. Since I was a toddler, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am, just a couple years, I've attended numerous marches and rallies, just demanding equity for all and, pushing for a better future, because the right to vote is a right to have your voice heard. And today that right is under attack. I grew up in the civil rights movement at 3 years of age. Yes, I was in the stroller at the March on Washington. We saw it in the Calais decision, which kicked off a wave of efforts across the South, which I live in Georgia, to draw Black voices into silence. We saw this week when the sitting president refused to sign a bipartisan housing reform bill that would have revived the American dream of home ownership, simply because he wanted a voter suppression bill passed instead. And we are seeing it right now in Georgia, where the Department of Justice has seized our 2020 voter ballots and election records from Fulton County, and is now demanding the personal information of 3,000 election workers and volunteers. Intimidation, intimidation, intimidation. Not because any court, recount, or investigation has ever found evidence of fraud, but because this administration wants to intimidate the people who make our elections run soundly and smoothly. Our votes are being threatened on every front, but I know that we're not going to be silenced, and the people's will is not going to be silenced. Georgia has been ground zero for voting rights for decades, and it still is today. And I've been redistricted, as I said, 3 times just since I've been here in Congress. This is my 8th year. And I've represented nearly 2.3 million Georgians at this point. That's more than any other representative in the history of my state. The redistricting in my state has left voters so confused that it's a daily occurrence, even among people who consider themselves politically savvy. I'm speaking to people all the time who say, I am in your district, and I have to say, which district are you in? Because they're confused, they don't know. It's our job to make sure that we stay connected with our local officials and organizations to ensure our constituencies remain informed to combat voter suppression. Ms. Reinemeyer, your experience can provide us with firsthand feedback on what it's like to be an election worker. These workers and volunteers, they're essential to our voting apparatus, yet they're increasingly facing threats, harassment, and a flood of disinformation meant to undermine their work. What strategies should we be offering our election workers and grassroots organizers to keep them safe from this intimidation and to help them and our voters combat the disinformation that's clouding the process?
Thank you so much. It's a very good question. And I'd actually like to bring in the Brennan Center. So one of the things that I attended recently was a meeting that they held for metro jurisdictions across the country. And they had a presentation that helped educate local election officials on just navigating the different legal systems. So what happens when you're served with a subpoena versus somebody trying to get your court records. Local election administrators and our poll workers, they are not familiar with the criminal justice system. So when law enforcement shows up your door with something, a legal paperwork demanding access to something, we don't know who to call and we don't know how to proceed when that happens. So what we're doing now, what we're seeing now is training and how to handle this event should it happen. So now in the future, local election administrators are going to be more prepared when somebody shows up and is asking for access to information, asking for ballots or asking things. And we can do that too with our poll workers well. So when the police are knocking their door, asking them about information, we need to make sure they're educated and they know what their rights are when they encounter these scenarios. Does that make sense? Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I yield.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman McBath. Next up is Congressman Hank Johnson, also of the great state of Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for hosting this very important hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony today. I'd like to talk a little bit about the cybersecurity threat in a state like Georgia that electronic voting is the way that we vote throughout the state. They are touchscreen electronic voting machines. And now the president is dismantling the apparatus to protect the nation from cybersecurity threats insofar as voting is concerned, like, firing people at CISA. What impact or what are the ramifications of what the president has been doing on the integrity of the voting process in jurisdictions where direct ballot touchscreen electronic voting is taking place, which is about 30% of the voters in the country?
Well, one thing is undermining the confidence of people in the electoral process without any evidence that there is a problem. The other concern is that the president will use concerns about voting machines to seize those machines, either before the election or after the election, and use and break the chain of custody so that it will be difficult to certify an election.
Well, even before getting to that point, foreign interference or malign bad actors, domestic, having influence. I mean, we know that the process is not fail-proof, that it can be hacked into.
Yes.
I think that's an important issue that looms large over the horizon as we approach November of 2026. Can anybody talk about additional threats posed by the post office in terms of voting suppression? We know that Trump issued an executive order, but there are other things like postmarking of ballots, and things like that? Are there other threats that we need to know about that emanate from the use of the post office as a voter suppression tool?
And you're right that the changes at the Postal Service, some of them unrelated to elections, presumably, raise continued concerns over relying on that as the only way for people to vote. Our answer has been to encourage people to vote early, to vote in person early if available, to use drop boxes and that sort of thing, as well as the Postal Service, because it's under tremendous pressure, and they've made changes relating to, as you said, to postmarking for reasons having nothing, at least it is said, for elections. And certainly, as we've said over and over, the Postal Service does not have the right under the law to run state elections.
Thank you. With that, I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congressman Johnson. Next up is our colleague, Congressman Herb Conaway from the great state of New Jersey.
Hi, and thank you for allowing me to say a few words here and before this hearing by this Policy and Steering Committee. You know, as a physician, I've spent my career looking at systems, how they work. If you have a system that works as designed to produce great outcomes, you will have something that will work for, in the case of healthcare, to help promote individual health and public health beyond that. Here we have in our country the best election system in the world, and it's being run in the ground, it's being defamed by the President of the United States for his own personal interest and the interests of his party and remaining in power. But our election officials take their job and responsibilities very seriously. They are not particularly well paid, but they are dedicated to the law and the foundational principles of our country. And thank God for them, because they have been under extraordinary pressures from people who use the internet, who get on the phone, who basically harass them. I was proud to participate as a member of the Democratic Caucus on the Veterans Affairs Committee just yesterday, where we heard from veterans across the country involved in a coalition to invite and encourage veterans to serve as election board workers, to serve on election day, to once again answer the call of their nation to defend and protect our Constitution and the bedrock principles of a free and fair election, so that the people may express themselves before as respects their government. And the Constitution is clear about the fact that elections are administered by the states and overseen by the Congress and not controlled by the White House. That was a very important principle that has been foundational for our country, because power, as its history has shown, often corrupts. And it often corrupts really quite thoroughly, and as I believe we're experiencing here in our own country. And so we should reject efforts to politicize or centralize election administration. We know what that will result in. I think people are forgetting that we use the power to raise our voice, which is now being encumbered by the president. We're putting people in jail who have been engaged in protests. One of the important, well, it wasn't a right then, but it was certainly an expression of the desire of people to engage in self-determination, to direct their own course as individuals and as people. And here we have a president who is throwing people in jail for raising their voice in protest and striking at the very heart of our democracy. A vote is an act of love for your country, and let's let that love spread as far and wide as it can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman Conaway. And next is Congressman Wesley Bell from the great state of Missouri.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yesterday, Postmaster General Steiner confirmed under oath that the Postal Service will refuse to deliver mail ballots to states that don't surrender their voter rolls to this administration. Under our Constitution, It is absolutely the purview of state and local officials, not the president, who administer elections, serve voters, and count the ballots that determine who the people choose. And my colleague reminded me of the saying that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And the thread running through all of this is the same. The president doesn't trust elections he might lose. And he is using every lever of federal power to make it harder to vote. Ms. Reinemeyer, I want to ask you a question first. When the president claims mail-in voting is riddled with fraud and uses that claim to justify withholding ballot delivery unless states hand over their voter rolls, what does that look like from where you sit? And the follow-up to that is there an epidemic of fraud in your mail ballot program that justifies this kind of federal intervention?
I think it's really important for voters and elected officials to understand that the vote by mail system in Virginia requires that voter's record to be touched a minimum of 4 times. We're going to verify, is this voter who's applying for a mail ballot, are they registered to vote? We're going to send them the ballot. Then when the ballot comes back, we're going to verify that they haven't voted yet and that it was signed and all their information matches their voter record on their forms. And then we have the second verification step before that vote is ultimately counted. So that is far more verification steps that are involved with any in-person voting processes in Virginia. So to accuse that system of having fraud in it, it is frustrating because it is actually more time consuming and there are more checks in place than there are with an in-person voting system.
Thank you. And Mr. Weiner, Postmaster General Steiner confirmed yesterday that under the administration's proposed rule, USPS will refuse to mail ballots to states that don't hand over their absentee voter rolls to the federal government. Can you walk us through what constitutional authority the Postal Service believes it has to condition ballot delivery on states surrendering voter data?
Well, the answer, I think, is none.
That's what I anticipated.
The Postal Service has an obligation to deliver the mail. That is the duty that Congress imposed on them. There are no circumstances there are specific circumstances where the Postal Service can refuse to deliver the mail when it's unsafe, and there are specified reasons in the statute. Not fulfilling the president's desires regarding who gets to vote is not one of the reasons the Postal Service is entitled to invoke.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for organizing this, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congressman Bell and Congressman John Mannion of my original home state of New York.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here today. I run in swing districts. My first election in 2018 for state senate, I lost by 1.9%. So I went through an absentee count. In 2020, I won by 5% in 2020 in an absentee count, as you can imagine. And then in 2022, I was redistricted and I won a state senate seat with over 123,000 votes cast by 10 votes. So then I ran for Congress. That was a piece of cake. So, Ms. Reinemeyer, I thank you and all of your colleagues for what you do and appreciate it. And Representative Dexter mentioned the ICE incident. That occurred in my district. And we could talk about that, but I want to get to this. People want to know what they can do. So you had mentioned, Mr. Weiner, that people can work as a poll worker, they can work as a poll observer. And I've mentioned that. What else can people do because they want to defend this democracy?
Well, they can vote and vote early. That's really important to make sure that their voice gets heard. They can volunteer. They can come work on our hotline, 866 our vote. And they can, and you can, get the message out that our voting system is safe and it's reliable. I think 0.3% of the votes are by foreign citizens. That's what the SAVE Act is about. That's what all this falderall from Trump is about. 0.3%. Our system is safe, and that message is important.
Thank you. Anyone else? I wanted you to be able to say that hotline again. I will share that. It is appropriate for everyday folks who want to help that coalition. Is there a website? Is there a phone number where people can say, I want to help and this is how I can?
Well, anyone can sign up for at civilrights.org for more information. It is our member organizations like the Lawyers Committee, like the Brennan Center, like so many others, NAACP. I was born in Syracuse, by the way.
Miss Wiley?
So I'm
Go
deep
Cuse.
New York.
You know who else lived there?
Who else?
Jalen Brunson.
Well, go Knicks. Okay. But I say that the way in which we can connect folks to work, please feel free to reach out, and we will do so.
All of that. I appreciate all of that, as do the patriotic Americans out there across this country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman Mannion, and bring Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury from the great state of New Mexico.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I think the number one question I get asked when I'm home in New Mexico and across the country is, are we going to have another free and fair election? And my first answer is yes. In fact, in most states right now, we are having them as primaries. And so if you have not yet voted yet, please go out and vote. That is the most important thing you can do right now to exercise your democratic right to the ballot box. But as we know, we've seen unabashed attacks every single day by this administration in every branch of government on our voting system. And I think the number one question that people want to know is, what are we going to do? Worst case scenario, what are we going to do, especially on election day? And I want to say thank you to the chairman, to the Democratic caucus, because we do have a plan, and we want America to know that we have a plan. And that plan includes shoring up voter integrity and poll watching in every state. It includes states who are passing laws like New Mexico to keep armed agents away from our polling stations and to give local jurisdictions the ability to enforce that. It's states like New Mexico who've expanded voting rights and are protecting them. And it is also our litigation strategy. So I wonder, actually, if I could ask Mr. Waldman and Ms. Wiley, what is our plan if, worst case scenario, the president does not accept the election results on election day? And what can Americans do to be prepared?
The states decide who has won the elections. Presidents do not. Indeed, the federal government does not. And one protection that exists is that certification of these results is a ministerial matter. It happens as a routine matter in counties and states all across the country. We need to push back against disinformation and lies about elections not, being rigged. When somebody loses an election, they proclaim that that's what's occurred. State and local governments have a very critical role to play. Members of Congress will have a critical role to play as well. But the fundamental bottom line fact is something that we all took for granted, which is the results are in the hands of the voters. We need to lift up the voice of the voters as who made the decision. And that will render illegitimate all the efforts to try to undo what the voters did.
And in other words, we'll need to use the courts to do that.
And the courts have stepped up over and over again, not just this year, but previously on this kind of thing, and we hope they will continue to do so.
Yeah, and I ditto what he said. But also just to say, I think this is incumbent, and we've been saying for our elected also be meeting with community leaders and our coalitional leaders, because those plans are going to need to be tailored also place to place. There are going to be different dynamics. There are different issues of who Secretary of State is, for example, and where and how the leaders from. Work with leaders on what the organizing on the ground is for that type of potential threat on election day. We could see from a federal government that tries to claim that votes that have been certified by a state cannot be counted because they're going to claim that undocumented immigrants voted. That's what we can do to be organized around where and how people show up and be loud in a peaceful way about what their rights are, what is happening, and who trusted, which is their local election administration and state administrators.
Well, thank you very much. And Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity. And I just want to reassure the American people, we are still a free and fair democracy. Your voice is your vote. Stand up, speak up, show up like no one has ever shown up before, because this is our year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Stansbury. I'm actually going to ask a question myself, just as we wrap up. And that is that I know you're all familiar with the who sits in our body and who is seated, that are sent. I mean, I have heard concerns about the possibility of, collusion with the White House or the initiative themselves of the Speaker and the current Republican majority, particularly because it is likely that they will lose the majority in the whether they engage in refusal to seat duly elected members of Congress who have beaten Republicans, and how that can be dealt with.
I know that folks are thinking about that, but I would again suggest that the most important thing any of us can do, and certainly that all of you can do with the extraordinarily powerful access to the public megaphone that you have, is that the voters decide. It's the voice of the voters that matters. And then any game playing, trying to use the rules at any level, but certainly in Congress, is to undo the will of the voters. That's and it's important almost to not normalize the idea that we've always had in running elections. And so that's that we all should say to ourselves, but say out loud.
We need these elections to not be close. People need to vote early and get their ballots in when there's no other choice but for a Secretary of State or head of a division of elections to certify the results of an election because it's not close. Then it becomes harder for that nightmarish outcome to be something we're facing. So, well, that was certainly a sobering conversation that we've had, and the challenges that we face to preserve our sacred democracy clearly exist at every level of our governing structure, whether it's underfunded security measures for our local ballot booths, to the electoral integrity, subversion, and corruption corroding the Oval Office that occurs even as we are meeting here right now. Our democracy needs stout defenders, and thankfully there was a room full of us committed to that cause today. And I know the people that I represent and each and every one of my colleagues who showed up today, even though many, they all could have flown home since the dysfunction. But I know the people I represent want to have a fair, regular say in who they send to Washington on their behalf. And so I know we stand with all of you to ensure America's electoral system stays strong, secure, well-resourced, and free from the trust and foreign interference that bad actors desire. As big D Democrats, we'll do all we can to build voting guardrails, keep mail-in ballots safe, restore the Voting Rights Act, and ensure Americans have faith that our elections are secure. So thank you all again for playing such a strong role in our effort today. And with that, the committee stands adjourned.
Enjoy more of our videos on the Community Advocate Network channel, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. If you would like to advertise your service, special announcement, or event, you may contact us at the Community Advocate Network at gmail.com.
For community resources and services, exclusive articles, and video content, join our private community on Patreon. Link is in the bio.